Okay, we're good.
All right. Thank you for joining us for the Cyber Crisis Chronicles 4-part series. We did the first part last week or so, and we talked about the moment of truth, which was the discovery, the point where you get that call and you've been determined to have a breach, or at least the attack vectors are showing you that there's a high probability that you've been breached. And today's segment is about crisis control, which is incident response and mitigation. But before we get into that segment, I thought we'd sort of do a little bit of a recap of where we are in the process. And one of the points that I really wanted to make is that when it comes to incident response plans, and we talked extensively about incident response plans last week, Matt, and one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is this isn't one of those documents or processes that's a break the glass in case of an emergency. This is something that's a living, breathing document that has to be aired out and has to be reviewed. And one of the things I firmly believe is that if your incident response plan has only been seen by IT, then you really don't have an incident response plan. It must be included in your overall business process, and everyone who can possibly be associated with it needs a chance to be.
This is the kind of information that, like, during employee onboarding or any type of, quarterly reviews or training should, definitely be made available to everyone in the company. It reminds me of when I used to work in healthcare, the old yellow binders we had for like hazardous materials and such, that everyone, no matter whether you were working with them or not, had to review from time to time. But yeah, this is definitely a document that should be changed whenever you change your systems. It should be changed and looked at, more than once, definitely.
Well, one of the things I used to do, ours was, it had to have been 6 inches thick, and we stuck documents in there and different things like that. We had really 2 of them, but one of the things that I used to do when it came to our incident responses, every time I'd hear of a breach, I'd hear of, I don't know, Kaseya's breach or whatever's breach that was on the news, I would get the team together, at least the person who was really the owner of that plan. And I would say, okay, what happens? How would this, if that happened to us, how would this plan help us? And surprisingly, it's pretty rare. And this is a well thought out plan that we had put years of work into. It's pretty rare when it really nailed it. It was usually, oh crap, we didn't even think about that. But I think that's the thing, right? I mean, if you thought about it, you probably fixed it and you're not vulnerable. It's the stuff you don't think about. And that's where what you said, you gotta exercise these things, and you need different inputs. If you have an auditor, if you have a CFO, you probably have a CFO, but if you have somebody who's mitigating, who's a risk management person, they've got to be part of this. It's not an IT document; it's a company's document. So, one of the things for sure in the last segment was preparing an incident response plan. Next, we're going to talk about what happens once you've actually determined that you did have a breach. But again, in the last one of the things that I don't think we got a chance to cover was, where do you find an incident response plan? And I'm a NIST guy. I'm an 861 guy. But I don't know, what does SOClogix normally recommend from where do you find your template? What standards do you?
So for us, we use NIST standards to build them, but we build every incident response plan custom for every customer we write one for. You can find a template as a good starting base, and they're out there. You Google incident response template, and you'll find some really good ones. The ones that we use, we've perfected over the last 10 years. It starts as a template for us just because we have the base, but there's a lot of custom information that goes into those, including your vendors, what software, what your critical devices are, who your critical people are, what your communication plan is going to be. And that could be different from a 2-person company to a 4,000-person company. Does your company have actual in-house PR reps, or do we have to bring an outside PR person in? How are you going to respond? Do you have downtime? Do you have cyber insurance? A lot of those questions. There's a long interview process we go through when we're building plans for customers.
Yeah, fantastic. I think that was kind of my determinant. Finally, I ended up at the point where, the best thing you can do is ask whoever's doing your support, your MSP or your SOC. Say, hey, what do you recommend? What do you have? Can you help me? A third party actually conducting and being part and facilitating the plan is a brilliant idea if you've got the
Yep.
time and you've got the
Yeah,
resources.
we pulled one in recently for a customer we were doing a response for, and their incident response plan had employees from 6 years ago who no longer work for the company, and no one knew what the phone tree was because it hadn't been updated since it was written 6 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that's trouble. We were, as I said, it's not a break the glass. You don't just create it and put it behind a pane of glass and say break when there's an emergency. It's something that it's part of everything.
Exactly.
And you go back and you revisit. And I think one of the things that I can't emphasize enough is, like we said last time, you can't protect what you don't know you have. Well, it's the same thing leading into this next segment. It's not just protecting what you can't protect what you don't know that you have, but also you can't recover and you can't determine where the attack vectors came from if you don't even know you have it. And the location for that information is your incident response plan. And I think in my LinkedIn post, I made this comment that, if you don't have an incident response plan, you're automatically 100 steps behind.
Yeah, and it goes beyond that. If you have an incident response plan, but you're not testing it twice a year for different scenarios, you don't have an incident response plan. So you definitely want to think of different scenarios. We get ransomware on a server, someone hacks another server, power is out. Incidents can be any number of things, and you want to test for multiple scenarios. That way you can run through the process of phone trees, calling insurance, bringing in vendors. It's well worth 2 hours of your time every 6 months or even every quarter to pull it out, run through it. That way everybody knows, and then you're prepared for if something actually happens.
Yeah, for sure. And again, you get a chance, you have a plan, more eyes that see it, even though there's probably confidential information in it. You just figure out how to manage that. But if you get a chance to say something like, you have such a broad experience and you have this red teaming background. Hey, Matt, take a look at this. Can I get you to take a look and review this or do a systematically review?
It's even more fun for us because, we have lots of clients. Every client has a different incident response plan. And so we have a different, I guess you would call it, different incident response plan per client. So we have to run through them constantly to make sure that if client A has an issue, we can respond appropriately to their plan compared to client B. It makes it even more fun for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I used to think of it like listening to a song or music. And you think about, well, one tune doesn't match all the different lyrics, and all the lyrics don't match all the given songs, even though you're using basically the same instruments in technology. Everyone's using the same instruments, but there's a little bit different tune to it. And if you're not tuned correctly, it sounds bad. You get yourself in trouble pretty quick. So
yeah, I mean, there are little things that people don't think about. Like, for instance, we have some clients that if their email gets compromised, they want our team to jump in really quick, disable, do all of the session signups. And we have customers who want to do it themselves. Those are things that, you wouldn't think about until you're in the middle of it. Like, for instance, having us do it saves, sometimes 15, 20, 30, 40 minutes of time that somebody can be in your system doing something.
Which could be a lifetime.
Correct.
40 minutes? Are you kidding me? Because that 40 minutes, you're standing flat-footed. And you're like, well, we're not really mitigating. Great segue into this next segment. The second segment of this series is crisis control, incident response, and mitigation. This is the point where you've, something's wrong. You've lost data. Someone's in your network, or you've got servers that aren't accessible anymore. Suddenly they're booting. They're not booting because they're encrypted. They're asking for a key that you don't have. So I think, it starts with incident response plan, but next is where do you go from there? And I think one of the points that you always like to make, because I've seen you go through this several times, is that making sure that you first and foremost find that attack vector. You want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, I mean, so for us, it's there's a lot of steps we go through, but we go through them kind of quickly and sometimes automatically, as we call it. But we want to find out if it's ransomware. You want to make sure that there's still no longer an attack vector. Have we disabled internet services, or have we isolated machines that have already been ransomware so that there's no more infections that can happen? Is there someone actually in your system? So we want to kind of contain. We don't containment typically is first. A lot of people always want to know exactly what happened right away. But it's a longer part for a later discussion. Let's get it contained, fixed. Let's identify any critical assets that need to be fixed really quick. Let's see what we can do to get you up and working. And we have time. during our collection process, we're going to collect forensic data. We're going to put files aside. We're going to make copies of hard drives. We're going to make copies of, volatile RAM. We're going to hold all that. And then after we're contained and we have you back up and your organization's back up and running and you can do business, then we're going to that's where we will spend the lion's share of our time going through all that data and combing through and finding the exact entry point, how they got in, what vulnerability they probably used, whether it's like SSL VPN vulnerability, or you just had something exposed to the internet that shouldn't be. At that point, then we'll find it, and then we can deliver a deeper report of what steps you should take after that to prevent any future attacks.
Yeah, one of the things that I always like to layer on top of, you've got this red team, SOClogix is one of the top red team companies in the United States. When you've got the red team, they're running flat out trying to determine where the vector is coming from, shut that piece down. But on top of that, as I said before, you can't really restore what you don't know you have. You also need to understand the order of recovery. Now, I was in retail, and in retail, you got to ring cells. You got to ring cells. And you can do credit card settlement a little late, or you can maybe even miss. I hope there's no CFOs watching this, but if there's a chance that you have to slip something, it isn't the ringing of a cell. And so one of the things that I like to see layered on top is sort of in concentric rings. Tell me which is the most important to bring up first. My red team is second to none. SOClogix is going to find the problem and they're going to fix the problem. However, we need to know what you need up first, and then second, and then third, and then fourth. And when you could, because it doesn't, I think one of the misconceptions, and is something that I'm probably guilty of at times, is suddenly everything's going to be fixed, but it just doesn't work that way, does it?
No, we, speaking of what comes up first in retail, we did some incident response years ago. It was one of our first actually for a county sheriff's office. So the county sheriff's office had been ransomware and they had lost access to all their systems. Their young sheriffs didn't know how to write paper tickets. They had to actually go out and teach their young sheriffs how to actually handwrite a ticket because all their tickets had been run through their onboard computer systems in their car and printed out. They lost critical hours with, younger officers teaching them how to write tickets. So that was one of the first things. They're like, hey, we have to have our central system up so that, we can call in, get information and, be able to write tickets as needed. And that was kind of interesting for us because it was like, wow, I never thought that we're at an age where doing things like that manually might not be taught anymore.
Yeah. Well, how do you like to see command and control? I mean, do you like, for sure, there's somebody who's going to have the plan and they're going to be executing against the plan. But I mean, one of the things you don't want to do is wait for 3 layers of approval. And how do you usually see that? I mean, in the real world, how does that usually work as far as who on the customer side is orchestrating this?
I mean, depending on the size of the company and what their layers are, we'll be working with a director of IT or even potentially a CISO or a director of cyber operations. They'll have the ability to, make any decisions. But I mean, I'll tell you, the first thing that we say for everybody is if you've been ransomware or you think someone's in your system, go to your firewall and unplug your cable between the firewall and your internet router or disable that port. So you'll lose internet connectivity. But at that point, we know that you're contained enough that then we can get in and start working, or we can, create a role so that our team can still get to your access, but nobody else can. Those precious moments where no one is hanging out in your system or, moving things around or copying data, very, very important. It's the very first thing we get approval for. Everything after that, we can get, we go through their plan, our plan. We have very detailed statement of works that, pretty much are given right away. And they say, these are the actions that we're going to take. If you say yes, this is what we're doing.
Yeah. I think it's important that you don't have to necessarily wait for approval for that either. This isn't by committee here. This is, we've got a problem. Your business is in jeopardy. And we need to be speaking to someone who can tell us, we have
retainer clients now that we have it set where if we notice and we think that they've been breached or hacked, we have the ability to go in and turn off their internet and then get back and then start work, call them up afterwards and tell them what we did, why we did it, and what we're looking at. In our mind, I'd rather have 10 of those as be a false positive and there's nothing really. We turned off their internet for 30 minutes compared to we didn't do it and now they're ransomware and I have to spend hours negotiating with someone to get a cheaper ransom.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind doing it. It's billable hours, but I'd rather much not do it for your sake. I'd rather shut off your internet, let us investigate and turn back on as we need it.
Yeah, I think that certainly before an incident, it's important to think of this not as an academic exercise, but this is fighting for the survival of your company. And there's nothing guaranteed about tomorrow, or there's nothing guaranteed about everything coming up the way you want it to, or the criminals acting in an honorable way. I mean, they're in your system, they've encrypted your hard drives. You don't expect that person to be someone you want to negotiate with.
I mean, I'll be honest. We've done a bunch of negotiations. We've helped pay a lot of ransoms. We've helped unencrypt a lot of servers, and the customer support is pretty amazing, to be honest with you. I've had ransomware groups call me afterwards. I don't know how they got my number. That's a little scary, but I've had ransomware groups contact us afterwards to ask, were we satisfied with the decryption and a few other things. And, they're pretty responsive. Yeah, obviously they're criminals and they're doing ransom for profit, but I've always been amazed at their customer service.
Well, it's big business. They can afford a lot.
I mean, last year we helped negotiate, well over a few $1 million in ransoms. So, definitely big business.
And, you and I, there's some more segments coming up where we talk about, how to ransomware proof yourself, or the fallacy of such a statement. So I think for sure, one of the things that we're kind of dancing around here is the whole communication cycle, communication strategies, internal team, regulators, clients. And when certain things get triggered, we were talking about how we need to know systematically what comes up first, which is the sacred piece that needs to be brought up first. And you don't want to find yourself where your red team is bringing up a system that's not going to be critical today, or maybe could wait a little while, or maybe you could say to yourself, well, that system, I'm not going to pay a ransom on it. I want you to just low level it and scorched earth, and we'll just start over. And those kind of decisions can only be made if you really understand what you're protecting, but also the same kind of strategy has to be used for communication. Like, you don't immediately start calling, the FBI until you're at that point and you do have a breach and you do need to make those, or CIS, or any of the other organizations you report these things, or even HIPAA. So I think one of the things I wanted to ask you is, in that communication cycle, what have you seen as far as what kind of a plan for triggering like different things? Like, it used to be the last thing you did was communicate to the public. And today,
that's where your insurance company and their legal the legal firm that they bring in to help you comes in handy. It's not your insurance company's firm, but they come in and become your legal firm, and they become your attorney of record. They do that for a couple reasons. One, so you can have privileged conversations, so that everything that what they'll do is the law firm will come in and say, hey, every email that you send regarding this, please make sure that we're included on it. So it gets included in privileged information to the attorneys. Two, they know what needs to be reported, what doesn't need to be reported. So they'll work with the clients and say, hey, and us say this is the data that was captured. What's in that, and does this qualify as data that we need to inform either the public, shareholders, regulatory bodies, etc. I mean, we've had them where a ransomware person has taken data, but it was a bunch of templates, so there was no need to report. And we've had it where they've taken data that was basically a membership information for a large organization that had a lot of personal data in it, so they had to report it out to all their members, to a regulatory body. But that's where the having cyber insurance that will set you up with a law firm and legal team is vital to anything in any breach, whether it be ransomware, someone stealing data, or even employees stealing from you.
Yeah, employees also. Yeah, I'm a honeypot guy. I've never had an organization that I didn't have honeypots spread throughout my organization, and I've never had a honeypot that wasn't breached. Everyone I've ever put out, I'm such a big believer in those. You don't hear about them much anymore, but I'm a huge fan of that. It may entice somebody to do something that they wouldn't normally do, but more than that, it sets these points out there. And what you don't want, these points out there were of attraction, and you want to focus the bad guys on what you want, sort of doing that judo with the bad guys. But you don't want to suddenly call your insurance company because somebody's on your honeypot. Nobody knows it's a honeypot. I mean, for a good honeypot to work, it needs to be pretty quiet, pretty secret.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you don't necessarily put those in your incident response plan. That's something you do on the offensive side. So let's do this. Talk me through real quick, Matt. So we've got we've been notified. Our member bank, we already know that it's the member bank that called us because we have a two-factor. They called us, we called them back. They told us all vectors are pointing towards you. You've got a breach. You're my SOC. I call you. What are the steps that you want to go through all the way through? Because again, we're in the second phase here, which is incident response and mitigation. We're mitigating this. We got to figure out how to fix it. Just real quick, what are the major?
We typically follow the NIST phases. So we're going to start with what we call preparation. We're going to basically have a quick meeting. We're going to gather some information. We're going to get your incident response plan and your security policies. We're going to have you give us a list of critical information, critical assets, devices. We're going to see if we're your SOC, we'll have all your forensics tools and chain of custody, and we'll have logs and information that we can review. Then we're going to want to definitely define really good communication protocols. So are we going to communicate via Teams, Slack? Are we just going to have an open Zoom that people can jump into as needed? Once we get through that, then we're going to start that initial triage where we're going to really get into it, look at the type, the severity, what's been impacted, what is it impacting your business, kind of get the timeline so that we can start segmenting out logs and capturing data for future remediation and future forensics data. But the big part is called phase 3 containment. That's where we want to start isolating systems from the network. We typically say, for our clients, don't start unplugging things or turning things off or rebooting, because there's a lot of data that can get lost on a reboot or an unplug. So we like to do that ourselves. So we'll start disconnecting compromised systems so that we can capture the data correctly. We'll capture, like I said before, RAM running processes. We'll take forensic images of disks as needed. We'll gather, provided they haven't been deleted, because that's a hacker's favorite thing to do, is delete Windows logs. We'll gather as many logs as we can. And the entire time, we're also establishing chain of custody on that entire set so that, who's looked at it, who's touched it, what we're doing with it, and where it's being stored. Then after that, once we've had containment, then we'll start worrying about eradication, getting rid of any traces of the ransomware, getting rid of any traces of, any open holes or vulnerable software. Sometimes we'll try to reverse engineer the malware, but there's newer strains of malware are, very complex and complicated. A lot of them don't have the ability for us to decrypt them now without working with someone else. We do have a fantastic new product that we've been working with that sits on the machines, and if they get ransomware, it does capture the key. So we work with that vendor on those to see if we can build a key before we have to go out to the threat actors and say, hey, you ransomware our systems. Can we get our data unransomed?
Yeah.
And then, the last phase really is that recovery and investigation phase for us, where now we've eradicated everything. We know where it happened. We have your systems back up and running to a point where you can do business. And then the second part of our team is going to come in and really kind of dig through those logs, correlate information together, and really find out exactly, what happened, how it happened, and will it happen again, and what can we do to make it not happen again.
Yeah.
And that's really in a nutshell, just run through those really quick. And of course, we're going to do a post-mortem for you. So we're going to come in, have a meeting. We're going to go through everything that we found, summarize the attack timeline. We're going to any technical analysis or forensics evidence. And then we're going to give you a lot of actionable recommendations. A lot of those are going to be, things that you can do today to tighten up security and make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Yeah. You definitely don't want to be the same afterwards as you were before. I think that's an important point.
And through that entire time, we're working with whomever your insurance company is designated as, either law firm, or sometimes I'll bring in a second forensic company just to do a different part of the work. So, we work with your insurance company, who they bring in. We like to be what we call an executive breach coach. We like to kind of be that man in the middle for you, because, when you have a ransomware, you have a breach, there's so much information being thrown at you as, the director of IT, or maybe you're just a CFO that got stuck into, handling all the IT for a decent sized company. They're throwing a lot to you. So we come in with you and I and some other people on our team, executive breach coach. We can work with your board, any executives, we know the right PR things to say to get out there so that, you're not showing any risk out in the public, or, assuming liability.
Yeah.
There are a lot of steps involved and just a lot of information at the same time. And it all happens really fast.
It all happens real fast. And as you were saying that, I was kind of going through the different things we were talking about. But paramount to all of that is having, when you start your process, having just a couple of things I can give you. One is a network diagram, and one is my plan. But more than that, what my assets are. Again, you just can't recover what you don't know you have, and you can't do it in the order. If it's left to the third party, the SOC, to recover it without having any idea of what is critical to the business today, this minute, and there's going to be a point where you're like, well, wait a minute, why are you working on that system and
Right.
all that? So I think having that, being able to provide that to a SOC, because like you said, it's just lightning fast by the time SOClogix comes in. Having those few key documents is going to be.
And we've had many times where we've gone in and there was no documentation on assets or network map, and we've found machines that the client themselves didn't even know where it's sitting on the network.
Yeah, there's a whole segment we should do just on doing backups, and not just backups, but making sure that you understand how, because it's not one monolithic thing, but we should do a segment on that, because backup, and understanding what it's doing and not doing, and how you.
Yeah, a good backup plan, good backup solution, good disaster recovery solution.
Yeah,
can save you all day long. If you have it backed up or you have your data available to be able to be re-imported, especially in the case of ransomware, it can save a lot of frustration, headache, and downtime is what we would call it.
Yeah. And again, we'll do a whole segment on that, but I do remember one of the things we did was we took all of our backups offsite. Mm-hmm. And I had somebody from our warehouse put a ball cap on and knock on, got security to call the computer room, knocked on the door and said, "I'm here to pick up your backup tapes today," because they would pick them up every day and take them offsite. The operator was in the middle of all these things. They grabbed the backups, they hand them to this person, and he walks out. He brings them and puts them on my desk. So they actually got our entire, it happened to be a month and quarter in, they got our entire backup. So we'll do a whole segment on that. But I think one of the things we did when that happened, when I did that, I was really trying to exercise our incident response. What happens if we can't back up? What if we don't have the data to back up? What do we do? Because your focus changes, right? Now, if you don't have anything to fall back on, maybe you restore the systems differently, or maybe you do something differently with a system and make sure that it's first and foremost completely recovered before you go anywhere else. So I think a lot that goes into that, mainly, as you said, working with your SOC.
That's a whole, the backup and disaster recovery is a whole other 4-part session. I think there's so much that can go into it, between immutable backups and offsite, onsite. Yeah, one time I worked for a company so cheap. One time I had to store the backups at my house because they wouldn't give me like an Iron Mountain or something to send them to, and we did. I think we had 50 tapes a week that we had to change out, and we would alternate network engineers, and we'd take them to each other's houses.
I went to our offsite. It was like I don't remember what it was. I went to our offsite one time and had the sheriff called on me, and I had to get somebody, our head of HR had to come to that facility and tell them that I worked for him. And I tried to get in with somebody else's card. I asked one of my guys, like, "Once you give me your card, I'm going to go test our backup facility." I went there, I submitted the card. The lady looked at it, said, "I'll be right back." Next thing I know, the sheriff is standing there getting ready to put me in handcuffs. And the HR director had to come and tell him that, I was actually.
Well, they passed the test then, right?
Well, they did. And they were not happy about it. But if you don't test it, it won't work. Even if you do test it, it might not work. Anyhow, the only reason I told that, either one of those stories, is that you really do have to, this has to be part of, and you have to test these things, not just when there's an emergency. If you only test it when there's an emergency, you're going to be in trouble. It won't work the way you want it to. So look, we've done 2 segments now. First was the moment of truth, detecting when you get detected or you're informed or confirming a breach. The second one was incident response and mitigation. You've decided it is in fact a breach and you need to take steps. We've talked about the steps. We've talked about using concentric circles about what needs to be mitigated or needs to be fixed first or investigated first, as well as having a good plan for your red team, all of the steps in that. Now, the third piece, which we'll do shortly, is it's time to recover. It's time to rebuild and remediation and recovery. The main thing to remember is you don't want to be the same afterwards that you were before, because these things come in cycles and you can find yourself literally the next day in the same place. And so we'll do the next segment shortly and have it published. Anything else you want to talk about, Matt, before we...
I think this was a good one. We captured a lot of fun strategies, walked through the incident response kind of mini life cycle. Obviously, if anyone out there would like to talk about an incident response plan or testing their plans or even having us review them, we're always happy to take a look.
Yeah. And, look, we can give you a template. I went out just for kicks to ChatGPT, and I typed in, build me an incident response plan based on NIST 862. I'm sorry, 61. I was thinking 62. I'm not sure why. 861 for a retail. No, I said for a SOC. And it actually did a pretty good job from a template perspective. But like what you mentioned, which is, not every song plays the same music.
Yep.
So you can't really do that. But it is something that's a good place to start. And then
that would get you 65% of the way there. And then you really need someone to come in and sit down and ask the important questions.
Absolutely.
What servers are critical? What software do you have? Who's your ISP? Various questions that really get down to the nitty gritty of what should actually go in there.
But it's just, you got to start somewhere. Call us, email us, and we'll give you a template as well. I think that's it.
Sounds great. All right, we'll talk to you next week.
All right, take care.
All right, thanks.